It's my honor and my pleasure to introduce the Attorney General of the state of New York, Eric Schneiderman, and he's our second keynote speaker. Each year, we seek to find those who have helped make housing just a little bit better. Well, just before the Attorney General shares his remarks, we would like to present him with a special certificate that honors his work in the area of housing. Here are some of the reasons as to why Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress's Center for Housing Solutions thought the Attorney General was most deserving of this special recognition. And by the way, for the traditional baseball card statistics in the background of the Attorney General, you have a document in front of you. So here are 4 things that came to mind. 1, for protecting New York homeowners through the Homeownership Protection Program, which has provided over $100 million to fund legal and housing advocacy organizations. For his involvement in work in the bank settlements, which included those against Citigroup, JP Morgan, Bank of America, which have resulted in a variety of benefits for the residents of the state of New York. For supporting the funding of land banks throughout the state of New York, including $2.5 million right here for the Newburgh Land Bank, as well as supporting the passage of a bill in 2014, which would double the number of land banks to 20 statewide, and for his work as co-chair of President Obama's working group to investigate those who were responsible for the subprime mortgage fiasco. Those are just some of the reasons why we thought it was nice to recognize his work in the area of housing. Obviously, we care a great deal about ensuring the integrity and growth of appropriate housing throughout the Hudson Valley, and thus, thanks to some of the people in this room, actually all of you in this room, we've established the Center for Housing Solutions. My good friend Jonah Mandelbaum is sitting there, who really provided the seed money to get it going. It is clear to us, Mr. Attorney General, that you share our passion and, more importantly, can supply critical leadership. Would you please come up and accept this recognition from Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress for all of the work you do to help the state of housing in New York, and then we look forward to your comments this morning.
Thank you very much.
You're very, very welcome.
I really appreciate it. This is wonderful, wonderful. And thank you for, I'll hold it up.
If you will. Do a quick photograph.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Wow, this is good. I haven't even said anything yet, so I hope I don't do anything to make you take this back. I have 2 comments about that. First of all, I want to say thank you, Jonathan, for your great introduction, your leadership, and I'm really grateful to Pattern for Progress for hosting this event and for doing so much work along with my office and agencies that are supported by my office as we take on this amazing challenge of revitalizing communities, of moving the housing market in the state of New York, really of doing what some of us hoped the federal government would do with a stimulus package that went beyond what they did. And to a certain extent, through a set of very unusual circumstances, I have had the opportunity to push things further and to provide, at least for the state of New York, more resources to continue those efforts where, frankly, the federal government, as it does often these days, fell short. I do have a couple of comments. One is, Abrams had an airplane? I need to find out about this. This could dramatically change my working life. But listen, it's great to have an opportunity to speak to such a dedicated and effective group of housing and community development professionals. You do amazing work every day to help revitalize struggling communities and stimulate smart, sustainable economic development. So thank you for all of your efforts. As your New York State Attorney General, I'm proud to be your partner in this important work. And I want to talk about that partnership, and I want to talk about some things that we just are in the process of putting into place this week that are going to expand that partnership even further. I also want to single out Joe Chaika, the Vice President of Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress and the Director of the Center for Housing Solutions and Urban Initiatives. Joe was one of the key organizers of this event, and is working with my office on overseeing a program I'm going to speak about a little bit called the New York State Mortgage Assistance Program, or MAP, which is a loan program to help distressed New York homeowners, and I'm going to speak about that. But Joe, thank you for your good work. So the main thing I want to talk about is some of the interesting history over the last few years of how my office, which is essentially a law enforcement office, came to be so involved in issues relating to housing. My work in strengthening New York's housing market, and by extension, our state's struggle to support a vital and growing middle class, has been really the biggest challenge and the most rewarding work that I've taken on as Attorney General. It is hard to remember, but when I took office in January 2011, we were in the depths of the foreclosure crisis that resulted from the collapse of the housing bubble. There were 345,000 New York families facing foreclosure. No one had really been held accountable for the reckless misconduct and the pooling and marketing of these bad mortgage-backed securities that caused the crisis. State budgets were collapsing all over the country. The federal government's budget was collapsing. Their stimulus program, in my view, was not as strong as I would have hoped. And Congress has just gotten worse and worse since then. It's very hard to get good, big programs out of the federal government or support for existing programs. So, ladies and gentlemen, our work at the state and local level is more important than it's ever been in my lifetime. And I urge you that this is a message we have to take to all our state and local officials. It's time for everyone to move their game up. So, as a new Attorney General, I took on a very tough fight to challenge the existing wisdom among collectively all the attorneys general and their federal counterparts in HUD and the Department of Justice that were in the process of trying to settle with the biggest banks that contributed to the problem for frankly, very little money. I took on a very tough fight to deliver relief to these families and to hold financial institutions accountable. So my working premise was that we didn't want anyone to be foreclosed on because they didn't have a lawyer or housing counselor or someone who could help advise them. Of those 345,000 families when I took office who were facing foreclosure, half of them never had a chance to talk to anyone. And even though some of them were eligible for modifications of their loans, they didn't know. So they didn't take advantage of it. Honestly, I think that picture there, that's what it felt like in 2011, facing this problem, because it was a downward spiral that we still had yet to hit bottom. We have now succeeded in the last 3.5 years in helping tens of thousands of families. And as I indicated earlier, I'm going to talk today about some of the ways we plan to do even more. But first, let me say something about the issue of accountability. This has been the funding we've gotten from the banks that I've gotten through the working group that I chair. It's a critical source of resources to help struggling families, but it is also important in its own right. And ladies and gentlemen, pursuing accountability for the financial crisis is not about demonizing Wall Street. I come from Wall Street. I spent more time in my career as a private attorney and as a partner in a big law firm, represented big financial firms, stock and commodities exchanges. I believe very deeply that America's capital markets are and must continue to be the best in the world. But for our markets to continue to function well, there has to be one set of rules for everyone. And without that, investors and the public as a whole lose confidence. So the deals we've been working out with the banks, and I think you'll see that each deal gets more and more creative, really are designed around the notion that, and this was the very challenging thing, if we can get all of the federal and state actors who have claims against the banks for issuing the bad securities that blew up the housing market, it's worth something to the banks because they can get what we call a peace premium. They can put everything behind them. And in that, there's been tremendous value that we've been able to unlock. But when I started out in 2011 trying to convince people of this idea, it was very much, in fact, I don't think I even had ropes. So what we did was we were able to negotiate a series of settlements. And the first money to flow was from the National Mortgage Settlement relating to servicing that provided more than $25 billion in relief to financially struggling homeowners across the nation. Now, what we did, what I did and my office did that was unique among all the AGs was, first of all, we made sure that there was before this settlement was ever negotiated, that there was established this working group that was going to be investigating the underlying causes of the crash and hold the banks accountable for that conduct. And the second thing is that in New York, we did things differently than any other state, and the results have been tremendous. So on the accountability front, this is not, and it's very important to understand because some people try to rewrite history. The market didn't crash because of an earthquake or a tsunami or something. It didn't crash because we're paying too much to cops and school teachers and firefighters. It crashed because of reckless deregulation and then a small portion of actors in our financial services community being overtaken by greed at the expense of ensuring a quality product. I was honored after lobbying and fighting and arguing about how the best way to do this throughout most of 2011, I was honored in January of 2012 to have been appointed by President Obama to co-chair the unprecedented state and federal task force that I had to get into place before I was going to agree to any settlements. And that task force is investigating the wrongdoing in the mortgage-backed securities market that led to the crash. Last fall, our working group secured what was at the time the largest settlement in American history with a single institution, $13 billion from J.P. Morgan Chase, with $1 billion of that coming to New York. Last month, we broke through that record and secured a settlement of $16.65 billion from Bank of America, and that is including more than $800 million for New York, and we're continuing to investigate and bring cases against other financial institutions. At the same time, we're using the settlement money that we've recovered from the big banks to address the crisis of affordability for New York homeowners and the challenges that our communities devastated by the crash face. We have used these funds, as I said, to do things that no other state did. The first thing I realized and recognized was that to make the most of the relief that was available to New Yorkers, we had to have lawyers and housing counselors. And we just knew that homeowners were not going to be able to navigate these rules, even if banks were making modifications of principal write-downs and rate reductions available. We needed to build the infrastructure so New Yorkers could take advantage of this. So we took the initial round of funds, and this is at a point where the revenues of the state had collapsed, and actually a lot of legal services and housing counseling agencies were going out of existence because of the budget crash. I made a commitment that every New York family is going to have help, that no one will lose their home because they didn't have an expert to help them navigate through the process and make sure that any relief available was provided to them. It is a complicated process, and it's gotten more complicated. It can be drawn out and confusing, but if you have a professional to guide you through it, that can make the difference between keeping and losing your home, between bankruptcy and staying afloat. So we dedicated $60 million over 3 years from the National Mortgage Servicing Settlement to create the Homeowner Protection Program, or HOP. We fund over 90 agencies around the state to provide free housing counseling and legal services, including Hudson Valley Legal Services and Hudson River Housing, both in Poughkeepsie, Rural Ulster Preservation Company in Kingston, the Orange County Rural Development Advisory Corporation, and Community Housing Innovations in Westchester, and this program has been tremendously successful. One of the advantages of having this tremendous network of on-the-ground experts is that New York, unlike other states that did not follow this model, we've been able to gather data on exactly who has been hurt by the foreclosure crisis, what factors put families at risk of foreclosure, and what practices on the part of mortgage servicers have contributed to families losing their home. We found that Brooklyn, Queens, Long Island, and the Hudson Valley have been disproportionately affected. In some communities, like Hempstead on Long Island and East New York in Brooklyn, roughly a quarter of mortgages are 90 or more days delinquent. And we found that the loss of income due to unemployment or underemployment is currently the leading cause of borrowers becoming delinquent on loan payments, accounting for almost half of all depressed borrowers. We've analyzed other causes of financial distress, including medical expenses, divorce, and hardships related to natural disasters like Irene and Superstorm Sandy. We've also tracked reports of mortgage servicers failing to live up to the servicing reforms they agreed to. So on the one hand, we're getting some cash that goes to pay for programs like the HOP network, but we're also getting commitments by each of the banks that they're going to have to write down a certain number of people's mortgages. They get a menu of credits for things they have to do. Some of them have been better at delivering than others. In New York, we know who's been naughty and who's been nice because we have housing counselors and legal services attorneys all over the state reporting into our office. We found that the most common violations, and these really are killers for homeowners, were extensive delays in responding to and processing applications and requesting duplicate papers. Almost half of the violations reported to us by the servicers of their agreement had to do with timeliness in the modification process. And delay can be deadly for families because the longer the process drags on, the more fees and interest accumulate, the harder it becomes to get a modification. So my office was able to use the data that we gathered through the HOP network to direct resources where they're needed most and to develop and implement reforms that have helped cut down on harmful delays in the process. For example, based on this information, we were able to get the Certificate of Merit law passed in the legislature in Albany, which essentially makes it impossible for banks or mortgage servicers to bring a foreclosure action without also filing the paperwork that triggers the borrower's right to a settlement conference. Some of them were foreclosing, but they weren't filing the key documents that would trigger the settlement conference, so we put an end to that. The law serves both to expedite settlement conferences, which benefit struggling families, and it allows New York State to begin to clear the backlog of cases that have become a significant burden on our judicial system. And all through this process, we've tracked where the worst problems are, and we've tracked the performance of the HOP network. Today, my office has issued our second annual report, and I think we're going to be giving that out if we haven't already, as I finish up my remarks. And the report is, it's short but sweet. This is what it looks like. And this is important to emphasize. This program is only 2 years old. We're just getting started on what we're doing. And the first 24 months of this program has been remarkable. We've made tremendous progress. The HOP program has provided about 34,000 families with free, high-quality housing counseling and legal services, and that the provision of those services has just increased as the word about the program has spread. We've gotten more than 11,000 New York families already have modifications that have been approved for their homes, and those modifications are making home ownership affordable for families who might otherwise be displaced and lose their homes, and we're stuck with an abandoned property. So we've committed to making the HOP program as accessible as possible. We've started more recently running public service announcements on TV and radio, promoting a hotline that we set up, and more than 9,300 families have already used the hotline to connect with a HOP provider in their neighborhood. And the data confirms that we're serving those New Yorkers who need help the most. More than half of HOP clients earn less than $50,000 per year, and more than 5,700 single-parent households have received assistance through the HOP network. Together, with many of the people in this room, we've succeeded in our goal of maximizing relief for New Yorkers from the first pool of funding from the banks. When the agreement for the National Mortgage Settlement was first announced, HUD estimated that about $600 million in relief would flow to New York under that one settlement. This is before we got the bigger settlements from the banks later. But from the first settlement, they predicted $600 million worth of relief, mortgage reductions, and other things. But because we set up the network and we worked with that network of housing activists, counselors, and lawyers, in fact, New York families got more than 3 times what HUD had estimated and got about $2 billion in write-downs and other assistance from that one initial settlement that we've been able to track. We hope to replicate that performance with these other settlements that are coming in and with other settlements still to come. By every measure, the HOP program has been a tremendous success, and I'm very grateful to all the housing counselors and lawyers who've worked so hard on the front lines with us to ensure that the goals were reached. Now, I wish I could tell you that because of all this, we've ended the foreclosure crisis, and the HOP program is no longer needed. Unfortunately, as you know, that's not the reality on the ground. According to recent statistics, over 225,000 mortgages in New York State were either in the foreclosure process or were 90 days or more delinquent as of December 2013. That translates into almost 1 in 10 first mortgages in our state. And while New York State was not the hardest hit state at the peak of the crisis, we're now second only to Florida in our share of distressed mortgages because of our slow foreclosure process. So that is why we're ramping up our commitment in the third year of HOP, focusing on communities most in need. And today I am announcing that we are extending the program for another 2 years. We originally committed $60 million for 3 years, and we awarded $20 million in each of the first 2 years to provide services across the state, and a lot of the initial funding had to do with just setting up the network and the communications. In the third year, we boosted that up to almost $25 million, and the additional funding that I'm announcing today will ensure that we have another 2 years of the program. So we're entering its third year. It's now going to be at least a 5-year program. And thank you. And we're using the data to increase our capacity in the areas where it's needed the most. So I'm pleased to make this announcement. Our commitment to this effort is more than $100 million over 5 years. But believe me, it is well worth it. The results here are so much better than in other states, and we still have to do some work getting the word out because there still are New Yorkers. Each time we have a settlement with a bank, that bank agrees to provide additional homeowner assistance. They agree to write down more loans, and we have to keep people informed, and we have to do it ourselves because we discovered pretty early that having the bank send yet one more letter to a homeowner who's facing foreclosure was not really getting them to jump up and down and want to come in and participate in the program. So we're using other ways to do that. Extending this program is critical because the foreclosure statistics are sobering, and as noted, this is about more than numbers. Foreclosures represent a devastating loss for a family and for a community, and the hope factor, which was mentioned, is tremendously important. When I took office 4 years ago, you travel around the state, and there were a lot of communities that just had lost hope. I think that the atmosphere has been turning around, and I think that over the course of the next 2 years of the HOP program and other programs I'm going to discuss, and the continued settlements with the banks will provide more resources, I think we're going to be able to reestablish hope in communities all over the state. I've seen it happening some places. We have to extend it to every community. So we've learned a lot over the last 2 years in the HOP program, and as a result, we've created 2 additional programs to help our working families in the communities in which they live. First, we learned that many families in New York need a mortgage modification, but don't qualify for one because of another small debt or lien standing in the way. It could be some missed mortgage payments, it could be interest, fees, and penalties, it could be a different kind of debt altogether, but that just makes them ineligible for a modification through a federal program or a bank settlement that they would otherwise be able to get. For families whose paths to a modification is blocked by a small set like this, we've created the New York State Mortgage Assistance Program, or MAP, which will provide loans of up to $40,000 so families can pay off these debts, make themselves eligible for a modification, and we're rolling out the program in phases and will begin accepting applications in the Hudson Valley on October 1st, later this week. The MAP program will make non-interest-bearing loans which are due only upon mortgage maturity or sale of the home. These loans will be administered through the HOP network, and every single loan that is made will be a bridge to keeping another family in their home. And in keeping New Yorkers in their homes, as you all know, we're helping those families, but we're also helping to bring back those communities and making them stronger. Second, we realized early on in this process that we needed to go beyond helping individual homeowners to help struggling communities that are burdened by vacant and abandoned properties, many of them left over from the foreclosure crisis. Now, I've spent much of my career working in the criminal justice system, in the legal system, and it has been recognized in criminal justice literature for decades that part of reducing crime in what we call the all levers approach is to deal with problems in the neighborhood. Things like lighting, bad lighting, abandoned properties. This is all stuff that contributes to crime. So this is something that is recognized in law enforcement, and now we're taking action on it across the state of New York. Because when a home is abandoned, it drags down property values, affects the tax base, bad for crime, and it also becomes a burden on municipal services and drains the local tax base. Vacant and abandoned properties, even if you manage to keep your home through the foreclosure, you got vacant properties on your street, you're still a victim of damage from that crash. The Hudson Valley is no stranger to this challenge. Just to give you one example, Pace University did a study that found in the city of Newburgh, just a city of only 4 square miles, there are about 600 vacant homes. So we decided we needed a broader strategy to lift up communities that were struggling with this problem, and we're doing that in 2 ways. One is by funding and expanding land banks, were mentioned earlier, and the other is by organizing an effort that I'm hopeful will be successful this coming legislative session to change the law on so-called zombie properties. So for those of you who don't know, land banks are nonprofit organizations affiliated with the local government that acquire distressed properties and either rehab them so they can be sold for affordable housing, or demolish them so the property can be put to some other use to benefit the community. The land banks have discretion. Sometimes it's usually residential, but they can do combination properties and commercial properties, something that was discussed here earlier. The reason we had to step in here is because, and this is not uncommon, I'm sorry to say, New York State passed a law authorizing up to 10 land banks in 2011, but failed to provide any funding for the land banks. So a lot of communities didn't even set them up just because there was no point. I launched the Land Bank Community Revitalization Initiative to fill that gap and to start funding land banks. Initially, we dedicated $20 million to land banks that were already in existence, from Long Island to the Hudson Valley to Central and Western New York. But the need was so great and the response was so overwhelming that last month we announced that we were providing another $13 million commitment. And I have to note, and this is a local success story, one land bank that has really become a model for how we hope this program would work is the Newburgh Community Land Bank. And we're fortunate to have with us today, I think we have both the director, Madeline Fletcher, and the chair of the board, Michael Vatter, who's also the chief of the Newburgh Fire Department and has 6 or 7 other jobs in that fine community. So I thank you for being with us today. The Newburgh Land Bank received an initial allocation of $2.5 million from my office. They have leveraged those resources to raise more than $5 million in additional support. They're using those funds to help some of the hardest hit neighborhoods in that city rebuild. And they've already started renovations on several buildings where they've already identified buyers. And they will begin rehabbing 10 more buildings in the next couple of months, and they have proposals in the pipeline for up to 20 additional buildings, which will include both home ownership and rental properties. So, thank you. Land banks are doing this kind of great work all across the state, but again, we always use the data we get to learn and try and take the next step. In my office, things do not remain static. We try and be responsive to what the needs are out there, and that's why we love having relationships with a lot of the organizations represented here today. We quickly learned that the original law authorizing land banks, which only allowed 10, was handicapping other communities that really wanted land banks. So I proposed a bill in Albany increasing the maximum number of land banks to 20. That was recently enacted into law, so help is on the way, and other communities are setting up land banks even as we stand here today. Finally, there's a related problem with a particular class of vacant and abandoned properties, and this is where I will need your help to address this in the upcoming legislative session. These are homes called zombie properties, which, when I was first told of this by my staff, I thought this is the kind of thing my daughter would make up. Kids all watch zombies. I don't know when zombies became so ubiquitous, but these are called zombie properties, and that's because they are homes that residents abandon after they receive a foreclosure notice. They don't realize that they have a legal right to remain in the home until foreclosure is concluded. Some of them just want to move on with life. The banks don't take care of the homes because they wait till the process is finished, and they can sit uncared for months or even years. So predictably, zombie properties fall into disrepair, burden neighbors and local governments, and they are not properties that really can be taken over by land banks because the title's not clear. We know who the title's going to go to because the bank has begun the foreclosure process. So we've proposed a bill in Albany, the Abandoned Property Neighborhood Relief Act, which would require the banks, once they know a property that they're going to get title to is abandoned, to responsibly maintain the property during the foreclosure process, taking the financial burden for maintaining them off of local governments. We've received tremendous support for this legislation from mayors across the state. coalitions of mayors, including our friend Middletown Mayor Joe DiStefano, Newburgh Mayor Judy Kennedy, Kingston Mayor Shane Gallo, have sent letters to the Senate Majority Coalition leaders Dean Skelos and Jeff Klein, and to the Assembly Speaker, urging them to pass the bill. We didn't get it done this last session, but we are very optimistic about the prospect of getting it passed in the session that starts in January to make sure the Abandoned Property Neighborhood Relief Act becomes law. So, ladies and thank you. And we will be coming back to you for support for that legislation in January. Ladies and gentlemen, we have made together a great deal of progress. We have put together the best network of housing activists, counselors, and lawyers the state of New York has ever had. We're going to continue to hold that together and to work creatively with the information we're getting in from our friends on the field, from our folks in communities all across the state, because different communities have very different types of problems. But in every community, keeping families in their homes, preserving housing, getting rid of abandoned properties, taking care of this basic infrastructure is critical to economic growth. And getting families out from under a bad mortgage where they're spending every dollar just trying to keep their home so they can't spend on anything else, this is critical to the economic growth of the state as well. Displaced families, they pull kids out of school, it affects people's employment. This has a lot of collateral effects, and together we are making a huge difference. We've held the banks accountable. We are restoring confidence for investors by sending the message that in our financial markets there is accountability and there is a set of rules that everyone has to follow. We've helped thousands of struggling New York families stay in their homes and put communities on the path to economic growth and stability. I'm proud of the work that we've done together, but I don't for a minute think that this is something that can be done without this coalition growing and remaining strong and getting stronger. Our partners in local government, the nonprofit sector, and forward-thinking people in the business communities here in the Hudson Valley and across New York State have made this possible. I look forward to working with you in the months to years and years to come as we continue to innovate, we continue to grow, and we continue to rebuild the communities all across New York State that are the key to a thriving middle class and the key to the economic growth of this great state. Thank you for this certificate, and thank you for your great work.